My Journey Home, Capstone Project by Jolene Anderson. Honoring where you're from and who you are connected to is an Indigenous traditional protocol that acknowledges the importance of family kinships and collective identity, as Baskin states. With that being said, I introduced myself using the Secwepemc protocol. So, white, hello to many. My name is Jolene Anderson. I'm beginning this process by honoring my traditional Indigenous ways of introducing myself as it relates to where I'm from, who I'm related to, and setting out my intentions or purpose of this presentation. I come to you today from the unceded territory of the Secwepemc Nation, also known as Secwepemc Ulu, the land of the Shuswap. My mother is Shirley Anderson. My father is Henry Sauls. Both are from the Nisgawnlet Indian Band in the Secwepemc Nation. The purpose of this activity is to complete my capstone project that captures and highlights artifacts that demonstrates and showcase my teachings throughout the Masters of Social Work Indigenous Specialization Program. I will take you through my journey of how this program ultimately guided me to self-healing and a lifelong learning. This is the way, the path. This path is the way in which I found myself traveling throughout this program. It is a visionary path, one that is guided by spirit of my late grandmother. I believe I was led here through my lived experiences and through the sheer self-determination to find hope in my life. I intentionally use my journey home as an anti-colonial methodology that disrupts colonial narratives. In alignment with Episkanu, Indigenous narratives serve as a socio-pedagogical function in that their objective is to change society by educating the settler readers about the Indigenous perspective of Canadian society. In other words, my story serves to resist the dominant colonial narrative and provides a personal, philosophical, anti-colonial understanding of what it's like to be Indigenous from my worldview. You will see through this e-portfolio that the teachings I've picked up in the various courses are interwoven between the course content, my life experiences, and the important dialogues I've had with others. My first order of business is to offer you an explanation of the journey we're about to take together. By following me through this e-portfolio presentation, I intend to start with the following. First, an explanation of the values and teachings I picked up along this journey. I refer to this process as my bundle. The bundle in this case is the suitcase that holds the values and individual worldview that contain and ground me through this process. They include connections, responsibility, and reciprocity. These values are intertwined and placed within my medicine bundle through the sharing of personal stories and backed up by artifacts that demonstrate the learning. I've developed these values by exploring my Indigenous research framework in Research Methodologies course at UVic and have included these learned concepts throughout my e-portfolio. I will start with a deeper explanation of what this Secwepemc medicine gathering framework means to me and how it was developed. Secondly, I begin to work with the medicine of connection. This provides you with the historical context through my journey that will help you understand where I've come from and how far I've come in this journey. This part is called the calling home. It is combined with the concept learned from putting self-conscious traditionalism into Indigenous social work practice. As I continue to forge this pathway with you, I keep picking the medicines. and placing them in my medicine bundle. The second medicine collected is critical consciousness and being unsettled. This medicine is where the roots of self-belonging had begun to form, and I began the journey of self-acceptance. Medicine 3 speaks to reciprocity and provides an opportunity to envision the future, to make space for the new. As we move to our fourth medicine of policy and social work context, I take a significant shift and call out the truth of policy and how it has impacted my life. I also find healing and forgiveness. As we get to the end of the pathway, I share my practicum journey and learning with you. With that being said, we now begin. Medicine Gathering, a Secwepemc Framework, the bundle. The first values and teachings I've picked along the way of my journey are connections, responsibility, and reciprocity. These values were derived from my research project in a research methodologies course. This course was a real eye-opener for me to start developing my own research framework. In this course, I wanted to explore traditional Secwepemc cultural practices while drawing out the values from the practice that could guide my research and social work practice altogether. As in all that I do, I also wanted to make sure that these values aligned in my life and were meaningful to me. I found that in every traditional practice, there are the values of connection, responsibility, and reciprocity. These values were also aligned with my calling to reconnect with myself and community. During the time of this course, I spoke and surveyed community members to see what their perceptions were of the needs in the community. I felt this was an essential first step, as I often felt as an outsider to my community. One of the most important experiences that ultimately guided these values was the activity of medicine gathering. As I listened and participated in this activity, I learned the importance of these values to connect or reconnect or be inclusive, be responsible or hold accountability, and reciprocity or give back. These values are at the forefront of the work I do in this e-portfolio. As an artifact, I've included 3 parts directly from my paper that include connection, responsibility, and reciprocity to give back with purpose of renewal. The artifact I chose was from my research paper. It says, the connection and grounding to the land and place also contribute to my self-identity as a Secwepemc person. As Kovac contributes, place links with past and our personal self with kinship groups and tells us a story of relationships, history, and holds our identity. As I moved home, I was able to gain a new relationship with the people and places, which greatly contributed to a positive self-identity. This was derived from my research paper in Research Methodologies 516. Again, I give great thanks for the course content that has outlined these concepts of connections and also gives reverence to my own personal experiences as a social worker, because I was able to create events that coincided with the lessons I was learning about the importance of healing and connecting to the land for self-belonging. I've provided a video artifact about the events where I had wanted to reconnect with my culture, the land, and the people. I chose to do videos because I wanted to capture a wide array of members near and far. I wanted to reiterate inclusion to those who still live disconnected and share these feelings in a way that will last a lifetime. As a time capsule that can be shared near and far. I recall it was a struggle at first to give myself permission to create my own Indigenous framework that consisted of centering myself. But as I continued through this course, I realized how interconnected I really was to the course content. For me, it was like the medicine gathered gave me more strength and courage to explore and be who I am meant to be. Medicine 1 Connection, the calling home and self-conscious traditionalism. I chose to share a story about myself because through this course I've come to understand and honor my own story as an important part of this learning journey. Within the last 2 years, I've practiced using my own story as part of the process of learning. As mentioned before, it's not only resisting colonial narratives, but it has been an imperative teaching about the power of being connected that can also be healing for Indigenous people. I learned through this course that policies like the Indian Act deliberately separated Indigenous children, families, and communities. They've caused intergenerational harms that silence the voices of Indigenous people from speaking their languages and practicing their cultures. This caused a negative association for the practice of any of these forms from happening. I've witnessed the internal shame within my own family for being Indigenous. Putting the attempt to assimilate Indigenous people into context for me has helped me understand the social, political, and economical agenda to gain power and privilege over race. I've included 2 pieces of artifacts from my unit from the UVic program. One being the story of the calling home that has been an important piece for me to reflect on as part of my story of resilience and strength. It is derived from my letter of intent as part of the admission standards for the UVic program. The other artifact being from one of my papers from self-conscious traditionalism, whereas the Indigenous values and ethics need to be recognized and revered in Western society as part of their own health and wellness. Upon reflecting on these 2 artifacts, it is made clear to me that my story contributes to my sense of belonging and self-identity that has had a huge impact on the healing in my life to be proud and confident in who I am as an Indigenous person. Medicine 2, Responsibility, Critical Consciousness and Being Unsettled. Again, using my story of living disconnected for most of my life, being critically conscious and being unsettled meant that it took a lot of internal growth for me to feel like I belonged. Many times through this course, I felt blessed to have had the experience to know firsthand what it was like to live in both worlds, or to have 2-eyed seeing, where I was able to draw out the strengths from the Western and Indigenous ways of living and seeing the world. I take responsibility and accountability for my own story and value the diversity in others to strengthen our connections and draw us closer, rather than perpetuating colonial assimilation policies that have the intention to conquer and divide. Through this journey, I've been able to embrace my Indigenous roots, ancestors, and ways of knowing. This is where being unsettled made sense to me. It has been the journey from being uncomfortable in my own skin as an Indigenous person to encompassing all that I am. It has been a process of breaking down the colonial narratives that have been taught to me throughout my life, and replacing them with the true acceptance of acknowledging my own story, the story of my ancestors, and the transference of ancestral knowledge. It started at the beginning with decolonizing my own thoughts and feelings of who I am. This was like holding a mirror up to myself every time. Being critically conscious, aware, self-reflective, transparent, honest, kind, curious, and accountable. The idea of this value of responsibility was utilized for medicine gathering, whereas I learned being responsible is to lay down tobacco prior to picking the medicines. This is about setting your intentions and showing respect. This has shown me that working with other Indigenous people requires a humbled heart, to walk gently beside them in their journey as they walk their own pace. Medicine 3, Reciprocity, Research and Practice. With this medicine of reciprocity, I found the opportunity to give back or to allow the circle to keep moving. As I began to explore research topics, I also began to investigate and experiment with my own connection to my ancestors and ceremony. One of the very important statements was from Wilson's book, Research is Ceremony, whereas he indicates it is the knowing and respectful reinforcement that all things are related and connected. It is the voice from our ancestors that tells us when it is right and when it is not. At this point, I struggled with finding a research topic, and I still didn't believe in connecting to my ancestors through prayer. But I eventually struggled so much that I thought it was worth a try. After calming my mind, I prayed for guidance from my late grandmother. Thinking it was all over, I went to bed. I added my dream to my research paper because it was very much a part of the vision that came to me that night. It wasn't just the dream, it was the feeling I got from the dream. I felt confident in my stance. I was also hearing that I needed to focus on the positive aspects of reclaiming connections. My focus question for my research paper ended up being, how do we reclaim traditional family ties, relationships, and community that lead to health and wellness? This is a very broad and open question, but as a parent, grandparent who raises my grandchildren, and as a social worker, I see and feel the challenges to healing and living a healthy lifestyle. I have worked hard to heal my life, help my family with their healing, and feel an obligation to guide the next generation, like my grandchildren. I will just read you the part of my reading from my abstract. I was standing tall and strong. I looked down to see that I was wearing a beautiful regalia traditional dress. It was turquoise blue with gold and yellow. I felt proud of who I was, and I was excited to finally dance. Policy and social work context. What I learned is that colonial policies have taken so many things from my own life, family, and community. Child welfare policies is only one of the glaring examples of these policies that have attempted to destroy Indigenous lives. While choosing my artifacts here on child welfare policies and Indigenous attempts to reclaim child welfare jurisdiction, I didn't expect to find healing, but I have come to realize through this process that my story is not the only one. There is strength in being a collective group like the one that is happening in Secwepemc territory through Stamamult. By realizing that I'm not alone in this journey, I also came to realize that the shame is not mine to hold, that colonialism and colonization intended for me to take the blame for their abuse. It was through this process of creating this e-portfolio that I was able to see it fully for what it is. As I look at the picture of my late grandmother who holds the sign that says, "Keep your chicken feed, we are Indians," it brings me full circle back to the calling, through the path to healing, the vision or dream I had of feeling proud of being Indigenous in my regalia. Something I've never felt before. In the picture of her, she is proud to be an Indian, or whatever they call us at that time in policy. Whatever script the policy says we should be or not be, it didn't matter to her. It makes me wonder if she knew healing would come. It would come from being proud of who we are, knowing who we are, where we come from, and what we stand for. Knowing what I know now, offers me a gift of self-identity and pride. I have begun the healing and can brush off what is not mine to hold. As a social worker, I can help others do the same. I can now fully embrace the new ways of knowing and new policies to reform child welfare that will ultimately support and provide a pathway for resurgence of traditional ways to care for children and families. Medicine 5, Practicum. My fifth and final medicine in this bundle that I've collected during my experience at UVic is from my practicum. For my practicum, I worked with Dr. Natalie Clark. My goal was to learn to facilitate parenting workshops and begin counseling practice for parents. I felt strongly that my lived experience as a parent and grandparent who's raising my grandchildren contributed to the collective experience of others who are also struggling with issues brought on by colonialism and contemporary matters. I had the idea that traditional practices would be the key to raising healthy children and families, but I had no idea how or how to begin implementing traditional parenting. I also imagined that as a social worker, it would change the way in which I worked with parents who were dealing with child welfare. As a social worker for my own community, I knew that working with child welfare was like trying to put out fires with gasoline. It always felt like I was fighting against a system that would never change. Honestly, I was getting tired of the fight. With counseling, I knew I could gain skills to transform lives from the inside out. I wanted to make changes at a deeper individual level. The parenting educational series that we facilitated proved to be very successful and much needed service. We held 4 sessions per community and felt that we had just touched the tip of the iceberg. There were many topics that we didn't get to because of the time limits. With this experience combined with my experience at UVic, I learned that my life experience, although difficult, has value and that there is a great need for Indigenous people to work with their own communities. The resurgence and reclamation of Indigenous ways to care for their children are all unique and important work. With my final thoughts, I leave you with one last artifact that ties into the bundle. I precede the principles of insurgent research in that I value Indigenous knowledge that is evaluated according to Indigenous standards, meaning validity of knowledge and experience is judged from within its own worldview. My journey and story of coming home speaks to how cultural and traditional practices influence wellness and wholeness as an Indigenous person. To feel a sense of belonging, self-identity, connections and relationships to the people, the land, our language, and the environment, and how these aspects are essential to wellness. If more studies like these can begin to inform policy developments like child welfare, it could reduce the amount of children who are disconnected from these things and the negative outcomes because of the disconnections for our children and families. Learning and healing from the past can become an empowering process and one that I intend to take with me into the future. I want to thank all of the professors for the teachings and guidance. Cook Jam, thank you.